substantives for the House today. First, on how the cemetery park can educate Japanese tourists and the value of this. Second, on avoiding provocation with the Japanese government. And third, the value of preserving history in Singapore. Now, the burden on their side of the house is to prove that every single person buried in the Japanese cemetery park, without exception, is inherently beneficial to not repatriate them. And note that the Japanese cemetery park existed long before World War II as the remnants of a thriving Japanese pre-war community in Singapore. Civilian graves are separate from the military graves, and soldiers' ashes are lumped together but in separate graves from the civilians. Now, our policy is fourfold. First, to repatriate the ashes of the war dead, but not the civilians. Two, to renew the lease of the Japanese Association lease to Cemetery Park that is due to expire this year. Three, however, as a condition, we will require that they remove all mention of military-related burials in the cemetery park, including all plaques and honorable mentions, and we will instead erect signs that state how regretful it is that said atrocities occur. Write-ups about various massacres, images of the atrocities, things like that, that detail the life of Singaporeans under the Japanese regime. So several points of contention for the House today, right? First, on repurposing the land. We say that this is inherently not true. We are happy to exhume the ashes into a columbarium to preserve space and in the interest of our allocation of resources, right? But even if this isn't true, even if we don't do this, there's a value in teaching Japanese and locals about the war crimes, which is my substantive, and an educational and historical value. This is why we spend space on museums. This is why we preserve the Kranji War Memorial, even though they were dotted across the Commonwealth. We think the value of education, because of the pertinence of this issue, is outweighed by the marginal benefit of HDBs, and I will clarify this on my substantive stop barracking. So second, on the Japanese diaspora. Who is buried here, right? We say there's a cultural significance to the people who are buried here, whereas they claim that it's out of convenience. People like the first Japanese in Singapore who was a trader and made his life here and had a Malay wife, or Takichi, or a novelist who wrote the first modern Japanese novel and chose to be buried here, and Japanese people come and visit him, Japanese journalists, right? And we see that these are expats who frequented between Singapore and Japan. But even if they weren't, right, even if they were stuck here, we say that there's some form of cultural affinity that they chose to be here because their will would have otherwise specified, right? And because they have a tangible cultural affinity here, they have a right to shape how their legacy views them. They have a right to construct the way in which people remember them and their contributions to our Singaporean society, which we cannot deny them principally. No, thank you. Next, on the idea that we will educate Japanese tourists, my first substantives. What is the problem? Under status quo, the Japanese Association and government have downplayed atrocities. The Japanese Association has avoided the fact that there are military graves here. Textbooks endorsed by Abe's regime have denied Tzu King and Nanjing. Abe has denied the atrocities committed against Chinese comfort women, and historically they refuse to issue a formal apology. And it is inherently harmful when Abe portrays these soldiers as valiant martyrs instead of the brutal executioners and rapists that they actually were. And this stifles the democratic process, fueling nationalist sentiments, which can universally be agreed on as bad. So what does our side do to change this, right? Japanese tourists coming to the cemetery will come to the cemetery park probably because of their deeply embedded cultural worship, but moreover because of the to appreciate the cultural impact they and their culture have had on Singapore. This is why Singaporeans would visit a Singaporean cemetery in London or Canada, provided a significant cultural association, or this is why we try local food overseas despite it quite frankly going to be terrible, right? And since the Japanese Association has constantly tried to downplay the wartime aspect of these graves, the current draw for tourists is to view the overall legacy of people in Singapore, not just the war, things like civilians. So, however, in order for the Japanese individuals to access the civilians that you wish to go to the park, Japanese tourists will have to view said atrocities and said signs we have posted about these cities, and through this, they will be educated on a historical perspective, often omitted by the narrative that Abe and his regime like to push. And this leads to greater awareness among the Japanese public. The comparative on their side of the house is that through art-based political maneuvers, Japanese civilians remain oblivious or at least poorly informed on the atrocities committed during the war. Next, and this is significant because as the Singapore government, as they have said, our primary duty is to our citizens, many of which are survivors or the relatives of survivors of said atrocities. People who suffered under the Japanese administration are owed catharsis and closure is more likely to happen under our side of the house when these people understand that there is some mechanism in which people are educated and the Japanese people are educated about their plight. instead of being 100% lied to and deceived by the government. How do we know this is the case? When people are wrong, closure not only comes from retribution, but rather knowing that what was done to you will not be again repeated to someone else. And on a more macro scale, this is why it's universally accepted that transparent admission of guilt is essential to the post-war recovery process. This is why we ban things like Holocaust denial, and this is why it is important to the Jewish community that Germany holds Holocaust memorials. And as an extension of the stakeholders that committed this atrocity, it is principally just that the Japanese public understands that what these people have had to endure. Because one, it makes them think twice before automatically buying into the culture of awarded worship in Japan. Two, it means they are more likely to have an unbiased understanding of the mistakes of their people's past. And three, perhaps practically, this reduces the likelihood of similar atrocities recurring in the future when they gain this understanding. This is why we place an emphasis on the study of history in an unbiased manner. But yes, ma'am.
I still don't understand why exactly you need these ashes in order to have all of these things on your side.
Because we think that a simple memorial is different from the ashes. Because when you have the ashes here, you are ascribed a degree of historical credibility, right? It is significant that these ashes are here rather than just a poster that you can read online, because you feel what these people have gone through. You feel the plight of these